Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Canada Talks Electric Cars webinar, brought to you by the Electric Vehicle Society. We hold this webinar on the first Tuesday of each month, and it's our aim to examine a broad range of EV-related topics from a Canadian perspective. My name's Tim Burrows, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. Electric Vehicle Society is a national Canadian organization whose goal is to leverage the expertise of electric vehicle owners and enthusiasts to help Canadians transition to electric transportation through education and advocacy. Associate membership is always free, but it would help us greatly if you would consider a full membership. Full membership is only $30 a year, and seniors can register as a member for full membership for $20. If you're interested in learning more about EVs and interacting with fellow enthusiasts, we invite you to join us at one of our free chapter meetings, now held every month via video conference. Today's webinar is being recorded for later viewing on the EV Society's YouTube channel. Just search YouTube for Electric Vehicle Society. Watch and listen to past webinars, and be sure to subscribe. Today's webinar will run no longer than 60 minutes. All guests have joined today's webinar with microphones muted. We invite you to ask our guest speaker questions at any time using the webinar's Q&A function. One of our webinar team members, Laura Bryson, will read out your questions immediately following the presentation. Be sure to use the Q&A feature, which you'll find along the bottom on the toolbar, and not the chat function if you wish our panel to see your questions. The chat entries will not be seen by the panel or used to accept any questions that you wish to hear answered. To do this, you can upvote by clicking the thumbs up next to a question that you already see there that you would like to hear the answer to. If you do that, it will move the question higher up on the list, and it'll help Laura with her job of reading those questions in priority. Before I introduce today's guest speaker, we invite you to participate in a short poll. This month, we're asking the following question: what do you believe are the 3 most significant barriers to EV adoption? Okay, we're approaching 90%, and I think we're going to leave it there. Hopefully you've gotten through that, everybody. And I'll show you how the room of enthusiasts feel about this. So I think the biggest reason that people feel there's resistance to EVs is in fact the sticker price, perhaps not too surprising. Lack of knowledge and familiarity is the next one on the list at 54% of you. And I think that makes a lot of sense to us, and it certainly justifies what we do every day in promoting EVs and educating the public. Lack of vehicle inventory and availability at 46%, that makes sense too. We all know that there's a long waiting list and that it's just not the same experience to walk in on a lot and find the car we want. But it looks like pretty much all of the items on the list are seen by some of you at least as barriers. Very interesting. Well, thank you for that. We'll pack that away for later consideration. So today's webinar is entitled Future Residual Value of EV Batteries. Is there likely to be a second life? And this month's guest speaker is Matt Stevens, Vice President of Electric Vehicles at Geotab. Matt is responsible for Geotab's efforts to help fleets successfully transition to electric mobility and to ensure utilities are prepared for widespread vehicle electrification. Matt holds a Ph.D. from the University of Waterloo with a focus on electric powertrain design and battery degradation. Matt, welcome to EV Society and to the Canada Talks August webinar. It's now my great pleasure to pass the microphone and the screen over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Tim. Hi, everyone. A real pleasure to be here talking about battery degradation and second life. I spent many years in a hidden lab in the middle of nowhere, hidden, tucked away in the University of Waterloo, doing my best to beat up batteries. And at that time, unfortunately, I was really good at beating up batteries. Fortunately, it's a much harder task today. I'm just going to refresh my screen here because Will finally flagged me on a typo, and I fixed it. But I've learned my lesson that unless I reload the presentation, you will be exposed to the typo. So this should load up in a second. But first off, data goodies. I'm a data nerd, so I love data goodies. So I wanted to share a couple with you. It'll just take a second for my screen to load up. One quick second. So the two data goodies I wanted to give, one directly relates to the talk, and another one is something that the team worked on that I'm just really proud of. And so I want to take the opportunity to make sure that you're aware that it's yours to use as you see fit. So first one directly related to the talk is battery degradation. And so what the team did, what Charlotte and Hannah and the group did, is they took the data from about 6,000 electric vehicles that we have monitored. We have a larger data set, but they pared it down to about 6,000 that we were able to include in this analysis. And we said basically, okay, there's a lot of concern and risk about battery life. And people say, batteries are extremely expensive. And if you're going to have to replace them after your warranty, but you still own the vehicle, that could be incredibly expensive. And so really what is the longevity of these batteries? And so we took these 6,000 EVs and we said, okay, how are batteries doing? And the punchline is that the vast majority of vehicles at their current degradation rates, if they maintain those degradation rates, the battery will notably outlast or will last the usable life of the vehicle. And now in battery degradation, there's usually a quick acceleration of degradation, and then it flatlines for a long time, and then it falls off a cliff. And so we don't know where that cliff exists, but all trends are suggesting that will be after the usable life of the vehicle. So that's the great news. We wanted to make this publicly available, so it's publicly available. You can pick the make model. You can look over, 6, 7, 8 years from the older models. Obviously, if it's a 3-year-old, you're looking at, 2016 electric vehicles. We only have, 4 years of data. So it is couched a little bit on the age of the vehicle, but you can compare against makes and models. And really what we found is that batteries are degrading like humans do based on calendar age. So how old they are, how many years. We didn't see a really high correlation to how much the vehicle was used, with one caveat that I'll say in a second. If you drove a lot or if you drove a little, we didn't really see much. So punchline is, if you own an electric vehicle, drive it a lot, because the battery is gonna degrade because of how old it gets, not because of how many kilometers you put on the vehicle. There's one exception. We did see a notable increase in degradation rate because of fast charging, more than I anticipated. And it doesn't take a lot of fast charging to actually see an appreciable difference in degradation rate. Now, sky is not falling. The battery still lasts a long time, but we do see a noticeable difference between electric vehicles that almost never fast charge and those that do a moderate amount and those that do a lot. We are going to continue to dive deeper into the data, because one of the things I really want to understand is in that fast charging impact, how much is there a difference between vehicles with liquid cooled batteries versus air cooled batteries? My guess would be that there would be a notable difference between the two, but we haven't finished that analysis, and so I can't share that today. But if you go to that link, we'll continue to update. You'll continue to see more vehicles added, and you can continue to see that be improved. The other, one of the things, being an EV owner for many years and in the world of EVs for about 15, 16 years, cold weather impacts, especially for us north of the border, it impacts, and we all feel it pretty quickly. We see a surge in searching for electric vehicle cold weather range around September, October, when it's not that cold outside, but it's cold enough that your heater started to come on. So again, similar to the degradation, we said, look, let's take a bunch of our data, take about 5 million trips, and say, here's normal. And so if you pick the make model year that you have, you pick the temperature, and we'll tell you the average range that we're seeing for that make model year. We'll also tell you the top 10% and bottom 10%, so the 10 and 90% windows, to give an idea of what's normal. Happy in the Q&A if you want to get into what generally puts someone towards one end of that versus the other. So those are two data tools, but really let's dive into the talk today. Behind me here with my co-founder Chris of Fleet Karma, which now both part of Geotab. That's the first electric vehicle we ever worked on. Actually, sorry, that's my second electric vehicle I ever worked on, but the first one that I was really intimately involved with. That is a huge hydrogen tank behind us. It was a hybrid fuel cell vehicle. The battery part was quite easy to get going. The hydrogen was not. It's always a very touchy conversation between batteries and hydrogen. I'd rather not get into that today. In my mind, they're both electric vehicles. Let's just accept that. I am more strongly on the battery side than hydrogen side. That's directly because I have worked with hydrogen. It's not easy, but anyway, I don't mean to poke the bear on that one. So, but that's the first EV I ever worked on. I absolutely fell in love with electric vehicles. The first time that we drove that vehicle for a split second, it was bliss, and I was like, okay, these are going to win. Yes, I'm interested in EVs because the environmental argument, but that first time you floor it in an EV, you realize that they're just fundamentally better. They will win because they are a better vehicle, just like flat screens won because they are a better TV. Originally they were too expensive and they had burnout issues, but now you basically can't get a cathode issue. Same with electric vehicles. Now in that vehicle, after that split second of bliss, because I floored it right after we got it working, I sheared both half shafts and created a huge amount of damage to our $1 million vehicle. But eventually we fixed it and it worked. But so that's my background. I've been in the space for a long time. So that you understand my alignment as we go, these are my daughters, Blake and Taylor, and most of my professional careers I have on the next slide is doing what I can to make sure that they never have to operate a combustion-based vehicle. This one that they're currently in, yes, it's a diesel excavator, but they weren't actually operating it. So my hope is, if I succeed in my work career, they will never operate / drive a vehicle that isn't electric. And again, drive may not be a thing for them anyway. So that's why I use the term operate. So in the context of today, in second life batteries, laying the groundwork, because I think I'm going to get into some pretty unpopular comments that I hope we can thoroughly debate in the Q&A. I do want to start this from my entire professional career has been about promoting electric vehicles and trying to make them a reality, and anything that helps in that pursuit, I like. So second life interests me. In addition, my background's in battery degradation and battery lifetime. It's a particular area of interest for me. And I spent, over a decade, in the past decade in electric vehicle business. So business, battery degradation, I'm certain there's notably better people in the world than me to be able to try and work on this, but I think I'm better than the average bear, and this should be a topic I should be able to provide some commentary on, or if maybe see a pathway on how to make this successful. So this is the basic concept of second life batteries. Again, I probably, second nature to just put everyone on the call, but again, just to level set, because this is basically the same argument that I've heard in the last 16 years that I've been in the EV industry. You buy it for $1, you use it in the vehicle, and you sell it for about 20 cents on the dollar, 15 cents on the dollar. When it's done, its useful life within vehicles, within a vehicle and a mobile power source, energy density and power density, both volumetric and mass matter a lot. You don't want big batteries volumetrically, and you don't want heavy batteries. And so when it can't do the job of moving a vehicle with sufficient amount of range or success, hey, there's a ton of use in, utility batteries, grid storage, host storage are usually the what people focus on. So if we look at this and take it through a business lens, okay, you're selling, 20 cents on the dollar 16 years later. If you're using an internal rate of return of 6%, which I would say in business terms is pretty low. So, you're being pretty easy on the argument. If you bring that back to net present value, that's about 8 cents of net present value. So if it costs you $1 for the battery, the future value of that, when you sell it to the second one, if there's no transaction fees, you get to bring it all back in time. Basically, it's worth about 8 to 10%, right? And so theory, you could reduce the upfront cost by 8 to 10%, which really would be phenomenal because, the poll said The big issue is the upfront cost of the EV. All right, well, if you can take the battery, that's the most expensive part of that EV, and you can basically net present value 10% of its future value and bring down that price of the vehicle, that would be really appealing. Like, that would be really fantastic if you can do that. But I believe this view is fundamentally flawed, extremely, extremely, extremely flawed. And when I tried to think about how to best describe why I think it's flawed, you know, being in EV industry and being in, you know, with a background in batteries and battery chemistry, this is a pitch I've heard again, again, and again. And I heard it in 2008, and I heard it in 2010, and I heard it in 2014, and I still hear it. I was in a conversation 3 weeks ago with almost the exact same pitch. I have this new cell chemistry, and this new cell chemistry is fantastic, and it uses different materials that are easily sourced. And hey, the actual cost of a kilowatt hour of my chemistry is half of what lithium ion is today. Half. And, you know, working with the OEMs, some of them are, you know, kicking the can and they're thinking they're going to do some R&D, but I can get this into EVs in 5 years. And I've heard this, you know, time and time again. And my message, and I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I'm like, just don't waste your time. Just move on. You are too expensive. And they're like, what? No, I'm not too expensive. I just told you I'm half the price of lithium ion packs, of the lithium ion chemistry. The best today, I'm half of that. How am I too expensive? And my comment is, you are not competing against today's lithium batteries. Like, if you're not in the market now, that's not your competitor. If you're saying, I'm going to be in the market in 5 years, then your competitor is lithium battery chemistries in 5 years. That's not today. And so when you look at the price curve, this is the price curve. And, you know, most people on the call have probably seen it. But again, if you're in 2013 and you're pitching me, hey, my chemistry is half the price of lithium ion and I can get in the market in 5 years. So lithium ion packs for $650 a kilowatt hour. 5 years ahead, they're 176. So, you know, you came in and you said, hey, I'm 325. I'm half of the market rate. By the time you actually got to market, you were twice as expensive as lithium. So when you started, you were half. By the time you hit market, you were twice as expensive. You will get beaten up hard. Now, for battery degradation, for second use life of batteries, it's even worse, because that first, you know, data tool that I showed you, the first, you know, data goodie, is saying that the batteries are going to last the usable life of most of the vehicles. At least that's all the data we're seeing is painting that picture. You know, across those 6,000 electric vehicles that we looked at the data from, there was only 2 vehicles that had a battery replacement, because we could see it in the data. It's pretty obvious to us when a battery's been replaced. Actually, sorry, let me clarify. It's actually pretty hard for us to know if the battery's been replaced or if you bought a Tesla with the 60 kilowatt hour pack and paid for an upgrade. So there's ways we can figure the signature of that, but from us, those look very similar. It's basically a step change in battery capacity. Anyway, having said that, 2 legitimate battery replacements, that doesn't mean the failure rate's 2 at 6,000. It's more than that. Remember, some of those vehicles are newer. But fundamentally, you know, most of these batteries, all indications are they're going to last the usable life of the vehicle. Most vehicles, light duty, stay on the road for 16 years. So, you know, my argument is, if you have a battery chemistry that's going to be in market in 5 years, that's a tough game to play, because it's 5 years and the battery curve for lithium ion is steep. Now you're saying for secondary use, 16 years, right? I'm going to wait 16 years. I'm going to let 16 years of battery progress go by, and now I'm going to sell that pack for 20 cents on the dollar. And my message is, you're nuts. There's absolutely no way that's going to make sense. This is the car that saved my life. This was the Chevy Volt, the 2012 Chevy Volt. I got in the end of 2011. I was at a red light, and the driver behind me was looking at their phone and didn't realize I was stopped while they were going 80 kilometers an hour. And you can see the imprint VEAA022. I had one of the green Ontario plates, Véhicule Écologique VE, and then AA and 022. I was one of the early ones, but you can see it's basically embossed in the back of that vehicle. So that vehicle saved my life. Its weight, its battery, basically the Prundle, the park reverse neutral drive lever, a low lever, it was warped because the entire crash zone wrapped around me, the battery wrapped, everything warped around me, and all I had was a little red dot on the back of my head and a bit of a back stiffness. That battery, when I bought that car in 2011, cost General Motors about $16,000. You know, that battery today for that usable kilowatt hours, not for usable, for the total kilowatt hours, would be about $1,900. But now they don't have as much, they don't have to protect as much window on the high and low end of the pack. They can use more of it. They get more of the usable state of charge window. So today, you know, to get the same range as I got in that vehicle would cost $1,500, right? And so this is just another way of saying the previous slide of battery prices are way cheaper, right? And so that vehicle would still be on the road if that driver wasn't looking at their phone and rammed into me at 80 kilometers an hour. But it was 9 years old, and the new market price for batteries went from $16,000 to $1,500. So when someone says, well, I'm going to sell it, you know, 7 years after that for 20 cents on the original dollar, so, you know, 20% of 16,000, which is 3,200, when a new battery today costs 1,500, they're nuts. All right. And I know I'm just belaboring the point, but it really, you know, hopefully it lands that 20 cents on the dollar is not going to happen, because when you think about the 16 years and what truly is 16 years, it is a long time. So I tried to think about what is another way to paraphrase 16 years, right? Because if the battery's going to last in the vehicle for 16 years, what is the pace of technical innovation? And I couldn't remember when the first iPhone came out. Most of my, you know, I'm 40, but, you know, I kind of struggle to think about a time before iPhones. I had a BlackBerry. I used to work BlackBerry way back when. But iPhones are only 13 years old, right? Only 13. So when you're going back 16 years, you're going pre-iPhone. You know, my daughters grab my phone and they use it like no tomorrow. The idea that there was ever a day before smartphones to them will blow their mind. But that was only 13 years ago. If you want to go 16 years ago, you actually go to the release date of the Motorola Razr V3. But that was the big hit, right? So that's what 16 years means, right? That means if you had a battery today that's coming out of the life of a usable light duty vehicle, that means it went on the road when the Motorola Razr came out, when the iPhone was, you know, only something mulling around in Steve Jobs' head. Like, that's how far back you have to go. So let's look at the inverse. If you have to look 16 years ahead today, so, you know, the vehicle's coming off the road. My wife just picked up her Model Y today. When that, knock on wood, hopefully it doesn't have the same fate of my Volt. When that comes off the road, you know, what does 16 years from now look like? Well, let's go back to my daughters. The one on the right, knock on wood, hopefully, you know, she can take whatever path she wants, but if she chooses to do post-secondary, you know, if she's on schedule, she will have a bachelor's degree, right? And the one on the left will be in third year, again, if she chooses that path. But again, let's be clear, they're 4 and 5, right? And that vehicle that my wife picked up today, if that battery lasts its normal usable life, my daughter on the right will have a bachelor's degree by the time that thing's ready for secondary use. Like, that is a long time. So let's go back to the numbers, because 20 cents on the original dollar, I contend, doesn't make sense. So let's go back to 2010, Nissan Leaf, first generation, 24 kilowatt hour pack. It's degraded. It's coming out of the vehicle in 4 years' time. It's 2024. You know, I didn't do 16 years. I did 14. I said, you know, it's coming off early. It's a short range vehicle. It's got about 16, 17 kilowatt hours. Based on our degradation rates, that's kind of where we would expect that vehicle to land in 2024. So it's 16 kilowatt hours usable at that point. So it was 24 nameplate, but it's degraded. So for you to get a new 16 kilowatt hour pack in 2024, you know, based on the current projections, will cost you about $1,900 US. Say all my numbers are US. $1,900 US if you're the OEM. And your argument might be, well, okay, I'm not the OEM. I'm not going to get the pricing power of Nissan, even if I'm, you know, a big battery repurposing operation. So I say, okay, let's assume that your negotiators suck. Let's say you're paying 25% over OEM market rate. Sure, you're $2,400, right? So you're between $1,900 and $2,400 for a brand new 16 kilowatt hour pack with warranty, with, you know, the latest power density, the latest energy density, so small volume, low mass. You know, maybe you're putting it in cases like utilities where those don't matter as much. I would disagree with the comments that they don't matter at all, but I grant you not as much. How much are you going to pay for that 16-year-old pack? You can get a brand new one for about $2K. So I'm not going to guess that you're going to pay $2K for a used pack with no warranty and really no clue of when it's going to die, because it goes off the heel, right? You're probably going to want to pay less, right? And so my guess is If 2,000 bucks is what it's going to cost for new, but you can get these things for 500 bucks, then, then maybe that's appealing. Maybe that makes sense for you. All right, so now let's go back and do that net present value calculation that I did originally, because you're not selling it for 20 cents off the original price, the $27,840. You're selling it at 500 bucks because market rate went down so heavily. Net present value of that, assume no transaction cost. You put every dollar back into the original price. Your net present value of that battery pack is about $221 or 0.8%. And that assumes that you can get 500 bucks because it's a plug and play pack. You probably can't take that Gen 1 leaf battery out and just go use it in a utility application. And I'll get into that in a minute. But so best case, I struggle to see where you're going to recoup, 1% of that battery price on a net present value calculation. And the price curve is going down so steeply that for you to reduce the price by 1%, an alternative for selling that battery 16 years later is wait about 5 weeks. Because in about 5 weeks, the cost of batteries are going down about 0.8%, right? Because if you just look at what they're going down on an annualized basis, basically just wait a month and you've shed 1%-ish, right? So all that to say, as someone who really just wants electric vehicles to happen, and if secondary life could help accelerate EV adoption by, bringing more value off the front end of the battery price, as much as I would love to have that happen, I can't make a reasonable business argument on why we can do that, right? But let's try and find holes. One of the arguments, when I've talked about this over a pint with someone is, but Matt, the curve's going to flatten, which I agree, but it's percentage reduction. But so in absolute values, it's definitely flattening, and percentages, it's tapering off. But they say, look, you can't go below the material cost, right? And so, yeah, true. But if you actually look at where the cost reductions have come so far, they've become equal weight out of cell and out of the balance of plant, out of the rest of the stuff that goes into the pack. The reduction has been equal from reducing the cell cost and reducing the pack overhead cost. Okay, well, so that means that historically that argument's not true, but maybe going forward it would be. But if you look at new things like lower cobalt levels and now some cobalt-free packs, there's a huge amount of effort going into either giving battery manufacturers flexibility where they can swap in or out materials depending on supply chain considerations, or some materials that have significant negative social or environmental impacts to extract. So there's a lot of flexibility going on that will drive down material price. And so yes, at some point, that's going to get harder and harder and harder and harder, but there's no real indication that we're that close to that yet. And so there's more to go. And so, yeah, we've been riding a curve of 15 to 20% year-over-year reductions for the most part in batteries. And yes, let's go under the assumption that, that's a party that can't stay that great for that long. Like at some point it's going to reduce, because if you assume that we can continue a 20% year-over-year reduction in 16 years, battery prices will be 2 to 3% of what they are today, which you're not even going to hear me argue. Like that's not going to happen. So let's assume we're going to go from the right-hand side of this graph where we're living right now, and gradually we're going to move over to the left. Even if we're only able to maintain a 5 to 7% annual cost reduction on pack costs, overall pack costs, we're still, in the 13 to 15 year range, sort of half. We're going to be sort of half where we are today. So, we're still talking material price reduction. And so, your argument is maybe the cells will be available early, because one of the downsides of these battery packs lasting a really long time, of doing exactly what we want them to do, is that they're not available for secondary use for a long time, which means they're further down the technology improvement curve. Okay, but I'm sharing all the data we have. The argument does not suggest that's going to happen. The data so far is saying most batteries will outlast the usable life of the vehicles. And on the right-hand side, yeah, some batteries will become available earlier. I don't think you want the battery out from my Volt. It is structurally sound. But anyway, if you want to build a business on battery repurposing, and your business relies on electric vehicle battery collisions, well, good on you, but I think it's going to be a tough road to toe. All right. So then maybe the argument about secondary use batteries isn't about trying to capture some of that value to try and help drive EV adoption. It's not about bringing that value back and trying to, figure out how to subsidize EV prices or bump up resale value, which has a similar effect. But it's just about cheaper batteries. We're going to have a ton of cheaper batteries. They're going to come out of vehicles. And yeah, they can go to a recycling facility right away, but why would we not divert them initially, let them live a second life in some other purpose, and then eventually, go to recycle and then start that circuit again? All right, so let's forget, the original price and trying to bring net present value back. Let's just literally look at, it's 16 years out, so it's 2024 in this example, and you can buy a brand new fresh battery, or you can get this, lower cost battery coming out of this Leaf. All right, so let's go on the same model, right? So it's $500 for the used battery coming out of the Leaf. It's about $2,000, $2,200, depending on how good you are at negotiating to get, fresh cells or fresh modules, all fresh pack, because that pricing is at pack level. Okay, well, you gotta find the batteries from all these Leafs. So you need to set up these negotiations with all these battery recyclers or automotive recyclers. You have to set up that entire infrastructure. You have to negotiate on a unit per unit basis. Okay, well, this vehicle is this old and this capacity, so, I'll pay you X. You gotta then purchase it from a bunch of different people. You gotta pull it out of the vehicle. That is a non-trivial task. Removing a battery from an electric vehicle is not easy, especially a vehicle that's 16 years old. Things rust. So anyone who changes their own tires to put on winters, that over the course of a season, it's sometimes tough to get off your lug nuts. Imagine something that's been sitting on there for 16 years. You got to get it back to your warehouse, your repurposing facility. You got to benchmark it. You got to repackage it. You're probably going to you're probably not using the packs themselves. You're going to look at the modules. You're going to, benchmark the modules. You're going to throw out some modules or balance modules. A bunch of things you're going to try and do. You're going to put it all together. You're going to put a new controller on it. You're going to probably have to buy some warranty package, right? Or you buy the fresh, latest and greatest 2024 cells. And yes, you have to do final assembly, but you're buying from one or two vendors, you're beating them up on price, you're getting the lowest price landed, right? And so I work for a telematics company. This used thing, like I not only like as someone who really wants EVs to be something that everyone drives, even when I wear my Geotab hat, like there's some things that Geotab could really help with this. Like we can tell you with a high level fidelity what the health of that pack is. And on some vehicles, we can read min cell, max cell. We don't generally because it's not useful for the fleet, but let's just wave a wand and let's just pretend it's not the case, but let's just pretend like I can tell you, I can do, module level or cell level profiling on these packs. But again, I can't do that on a lot of vehicles, but let's just pretend like I can. So let's say I can do that. And I can say, okay, this battery coming out of this vehicle, it's just about to hit its end of life. Here's the characterization of all the modules. Here's the characterization of the cells. It's ideally suited for a utility application. Its value is as high as it can be. Let's just pretend like I can do that, right? All right, that makes life better. But let's look at the used and the new. And the difference, once you lose some cells and modules is about $1,500. And so, but there's a bunch of extra steps. And so one way to look at that steps is if I want to have a reasonably medium profit, low profit business, how many hours can I invest in every used pack to get it back, to repurpose it, to get it ready and get it shipped out the door versus just buying new modules? So what is my parity point? And so on this, I used about $150 per hour. Yes, you're saying, look, that's a lot. That's expensive for a person. I agree. But if you include some some equipment, some capitalization, maybe you need a truck to bring the packs back, $150 with a minor profit is pretty reasonable when you're using it to cover some overhead costs and a bunch of CapEx costs and material and equipment. So let's just bear with me on the $150 sort of all in with a little bit of profit in there. I basically have 10 to 10 and a half hours. And so for each of the Nissan Leafs, I have 10 hours total not 10 hours of 5 people, right? If it's 5 people, I have 2 hours per person, but I have 10 hours total time budget to spend on sourcing the batteries, negotiating the price, getting it out of the vehicle, getting it back to my warehouse. That includes shipping, right? Because it's small volume shipping. I got to benchmark all the cells. I got to repackage provision, right? I got to do all that with no more than 10 hours per pack. Given my background on battery stuff, I can tell you, I don't see a way to make that happen. I don't see all of those steps happen reliably and scalably in under 10 hours. And let's say even if you do it in 10 hours, you're just at purchase price parity. All you're doing is being able to sell the pack at roughly the same price as you could getting brand new cells and modules, right? And this assumes you don't need any of the power or energy density improvements of, that 16-year newer technology, right? And let's say you didn't even have to pay for the used pack. All right, rather than a 10.5 hour budget, you have 15 hours. I still don't think in 15 hours I could do all that stuff at scale. Like there's just way too much to do. And again, that only brings you up to cost parity with buying new cells. And the new cells would obviously have higher energy density, higher power density. And so there's a bit of shout out to Wilf as a fellow Kubota lover. So Wilf helped me buy my Kubota. I ended up buying new because the resale values were too high. I just couldn't justify it because Kubota's, the resale value is excellent. Because if you look at a brand new Kubota tractor versus a 10-year-old Kubota tractor, they're very similar. There's not a lot of improvements. And they can last for decades without a lot of work. They're easy to repair, a lot of replacement parts. I also love ThinkPads. But a ThinkPad from 10 years ago, right, is now, like, you can't even compare it to a new ThinkPad, right? Its useful life is about the life of the time the first owner has it. If you have a ThinkPad for 4 or 5 years, yeah, it can last a little longer, but not a ton longer than that first use. It's hard to repair, especially after the first couple of years. And the supply chain only lasts a couple of years, right? And so when I think about battery packs, and I think about, are battery packs more like Kubotas or battery packs more like ThinkPads? I very much clearly go to the left-hand side of the slide. Battery packs are look and feel a lot more like a ThinkPad than they do like a Kubota. So just wrapping up so we can hopefully have a thorough Q&A. The trends that are driving EV adoption, they're lasting a good amount, like all data suggesting that they're going to outlive the usable life of that vehicle. All right. They're improving dramatically, energy density, power density, lifetime, everything's getting better very fast. The price curve is dropping at a rate that even shocks me. Like, I am surprised that we've been able to make such good progress as an industry over the last number of years. All of these are amazing. I am delighted that all of these are happening because they're changing the economics and the range case for EVs so quickly. The casualty of that is it makes it extremely hard, at least the way I'm looking at it, to make any case for a secondary life of batteries. So I'll take this trade-off. I would much rather be able to move EV adoption extremely fast because of all these great advances and just accept that that means that, secondary life is probably going to be difficult, at least the way I'm internalizing it. And then we'll go through the recycle life, we'll get it through recycle faster. We won't go to that secondary life. I'll take that trade-off any day of the week. But I have a real tough time seeing where it makes sense for secondary use. So with that, I will be making a new pack at some point. This diesel excavator that I had to rent, the project I'm going to have with my daughters is actually making an electric version. Hobby, this is a fun side project. And part of me was I really wanted to get used batteries and make the whole thing out of used batteries. But I'm telling you, I can't even make the case for my own. And I want to use batteries, but it is just going to be better for me to buy new cells and modules and make my own little custom pack with my daughters. Really quick, Geotab, we work with fleets all around the world to help them electrify. Really, most of the major fleets around the world that are electrifying, we're really fortunate to be working with them. We use data off their current gas and diesel vehicles to find out where in their fleet they could and should go electric. We use some predictive modeling to say if you replace that gas with electric, this is where it would do the job and save you money. And then helping fleets all over the world get their data off electric vehicles. And then we get a lot of electric vehicles. Our system integrates with charging stations to make sure that they can integrate load efficiently. sorry, I should advertise. This is the 40-minute sales pitch of Geotab, just for those that have no idea what Geotab is. So that's the one half, which is, Geotab working with fleets all around the world to help them electrify. There's a second half of the business, and I really wanted to hit on this mainly as a thank you, because there's many folks that are EV Society members that are, partake in some of our Smart Charge programs. So thank you. So Smart Charge is about working with utilities to making sure that they know if they're ready for mass electrification, and reading the data. Broadly, the sky is not falling. Grid level, we're fine. There's some street level things that we have to be worried about. I'm happy to share the Charge the North data, the Charge the North report with everyone. Definitely some street level stuff we have to be worried about for load. But fortunately, with Smart Charge and a few other options, you can shape the load. And so we have a number of programs around the world where if you charge at times the utility wants, we give you money back. If you don't charge at times the utility wants, we don't give you money back. So it's a nice win-win. Grid operator and utility gets to have more resilient infrastructure and lower cost of energy delivery. And basically they split that benefits with the EV owner. So that's the 45 second pitch, so you know what Geotab is. But back to the core punchline, I really would love for second life batteries to work. They kind of penciled out maybe 7-8 years ago. I see no reasonable way to make them pencil out now, but I would love for people in the Q&A and discussion to educate me. I would really genuinely love to be wrong on this, but I just don't see any case for it. So with that, thank you very much. Look forward to the Q&A. There's a link to a bonus report. It's using Charge the North data and a few other things to say, okay, well, what did EV load on the grid look like a decade ago? What does it look like today? How is that different? There's some very substantial differences, and really wanted to thank EV Society members, as many of those, the people in Charge the North were EV Society members. So thanks a lot, and look forward to hopefully a rigorous debate.
Thanks a lot, Matt. That's terrific. I'm going to now pass things over to our one of our EV Society members, Laura Bryson, and Laura's offered to take you through, or take us all through, some of the questions that have been submitted up to this point. And I'll just remind everyone to, as we go along, please do use the Q&A, not the chat, for any questions that may yet arise. Okay, Laura.
Thanks a lot, Matt and Tim. We'll start here with NSA. What do you mean by moderate amount of fast charging resulting in battery degradation? Is there a number of hours of fast charging?
Yeah, let me pull up. I want to, because we carved it up a bunch of ways. I just want to pull up what we had in that final. Maybe what I can do is, I'm not sure if there's an easy way for me to share my screen. Oh, sorry. Well, I'm sorry. I'm sharing my screen, but change the screen that I'm sharing. Let me see if I can switch this successfully. So if we come here, because I just want to make sure I'm matching the final one we put in this report. So quickly, this is the difference between someone that drives 8,000 kilometers a year or less, or someone that drives more than 20,000 kilometers, right? So we didn't even show the middle group. We showed the very low use and very high use, and those lines are pretty darn close. Again, saying that, drive a lot. Please do. It doesn't accelerate degradation heavily. Then there's the climate you live in, but this is what I was going for here, right here. There you go. So there's the breakdown of someone that never DC fast charges. 0 to, well, sorry, it shouldn't say 0 to 3, greater than 0. So 0.1 to 3 per month, and then more than 3 per month. So you can see that gives you a reasonable window. This was like, I didn't expect 0 to 3 to be that markedly off of the never DCSC. I was surprised, but again, we're diving more into it, seeing if it's different. This is aggregating across a bunch of makes and models. This is, also looking, sorry, let me highlight. This is also a subset of only looking at people in hot climates. So, but if you only operate in cold, then it's a different data set. It's not quite as sensitive. We didn't show all the plots. But I would say for most of Canada, we actually qualify as hot in some areas. You really have to go to northern Canada to get the only cold. So even, here in southern Ontario, technically we categorize as a partially hot climate. So we actually could show up on this graph.
Awesome. Next from Sean, is EV battery degradation impacted by how often it is charged to full versus charging to 80%, for example?
Yes. So yeah. So if you have a vehicle that you can easily stop at 80%, do. I strongly recommend it, at least for the summer months. So it's highly proportionate to the ambient temperature. And so in winter, it doesn't matter as much if you bring it up to 90, 95. If it's 35, 40 degrees out, it's actually, it's nonlinear. So it's quadratic function. So basically, as soon as you get up above 35, you really don't want a battery, sitting full in hot weather baking. It's quite bad. And again, sky's not falling, but it's a very noticeable increase in degradation.
Next from Simon, do you think solid state batteries will come to market?
And it goes back to the chemistry question. You know what? I think what makes me really happy is I don't think we need solid state batteries to come to market for massively widespread electric vehicle adoption. So I don't think we require it. The glide path for lithium battery chemistry is coming down, and the lifetime, like what Jeff Don's lab, recently published, and some other folks that are publishing some data that are showing, like, maybe we're not million mile, maybe we are million mile, but like getting up 800, 900,000 kilometer life batteries is attainable. And it's not far from where we are. So I think I'm extremely bullish on lithium ion, a huge amount of investment. The glide path is proven, it's going the directions we want. Will solid state happen? Maybe. But being in the space for 16 years, there's always a new sexier chemistry, and it predated solid state, and I feel like it would go on past solid state. So maybe they come. If they do, great, awesome, things will go faster. I'm not going to hold my breath. I'll bet on lithium ion for now, because I think lithium ion can get us to where we need to go.
From James Stevens, where do you recycle depleted batteries so they don't become a hazardous waste in the landfill?
Yeah, so that's a really good question that, like, at this point, you're definitely getting outside of my area of strength. There was a good EMC webinar not too long ago on battery recycling and some of the new technologies in that. So, but at that point, we're really getting outside of the area that I'm most knowledgeable on. So, apologies, but I'm going to duck out of that question, because I know that there's good progress. I know, it's been paraphrased to me that we're in pretty good shape, but I don't know how to really efficiently answer that question.
Fair enough. From Eric Stevens, battery costs have drastically dropped over the last decade, but now the raw material cost is starting to make up a larger proportion of the battery costs. Do you envision costs to continue to drop at the same rate year over year, or will new technology and chemistries keep the pace?
Yeah, so I should highlight, because those are three questions from people with the last name Stevens, that I think we spell our names sometimes differently, and I don't think the three of us are known to be related. But anyway, that aside, so this is where it's interesting. If you actually look at where the price reductions have come, the proportion of pack to materials, yes, it's narrowing, but not that much. There's still actually a pretty heavy reduction on material cost. Like, it hasn't been flat. Like, the reduction hasn't been out of the non-material costs, the other processing costs and balance of plant. So when I look at that, and I know some of the chemistries that are being, are sort of in design validation, because there's sort of lab design validation and production. If I look at what's in sort of this middle range, there's still a lot of optionality to drive out cost. And so I don't think we've extracted all the reductions that we can on material costs. Material costs have come down, and I believe that they'll continue to come down for a little bit more. We will reasonably hit some floors, but some of these design validation chemistries and technologies that are being worked on really reduce some of the loadings of some of the more expensive materials, or they give optionality where it's a little bit easier in production processes to have a couple alternate materials you could use. It's not, it's not like booking, not like cooking a, a chocolate chip cookie where you can just substitute super easily. It's not that simple, but there is optionality being built in where some of these more sensitive materials that there's not full lock-in on. And people usually talk about lithium. Lithium is not as much of a mass of a lithium pack as most people think. It's the actual mass of the pack is a bunch of other things. So lithium is a notable portion, but you're definitely under 20% of the pack mass, like notably under 20. So it's not as big a component as a lot of people often think.
Next from Jordan. Price degradation has been impressive. However, I would assume there are fundamental cost minimums based on material supply for a particular battery chemistry. Do you see this declining curve as asymptomatic, and where do you project this curve will level out?
Yeah, so I think there's like that. So again, we're I think there's still more we can ride down, and from folks that understand it way more than I do, there's a huge debate over where that will bottom out. We're around 150 kilowatt hour, depending on who you talk to these days, is sort of best, most favored nation pricing. Most people and most forecasts get us down to about $100 kilowatt hour without a ton of effort. There's some debate that some people are pretty close to that already. So, if we're down, let's just do the mental math really briefly. Let's say we're at $100, right? And my vehicle, 500 kilometer range, 75 kilowatt hour pack. It's a $7,500 battery at $100 kilowatt hour US. Add a couple grand for motors and power controllers, like in DC, all that fun stuff. You're talking about 10K for a powertrain that is, a 500-mile powertrain. That can go to bat with a gas or diesel equivalent pretty easily. I guess I'm ducking your question a little bit. Like, are we going to end at 100 or 90 or 80 or 70? I don't know, but like at 140, 130, we're pretty darn competitive on a total cost, and you're not far off from purchase price parity. And we're on a glide path to get us to purchase price parity without a single technology breakthrough, right? And that's one of the things that I think is most exciting. When you look at that lithium ion cost curve, there's no mind-blowing breakthrough in that. We went from $1,100 down to $150, doing normal, boring, continuous improvement. I'm not calling it easy. There was, a bunch of people's blood, sweat, and tears making that happen. Not me, but millions of people hours to make that happen, but not a single breakthrough, right? And so the question about solid state batteries, perfect example. Like we went from 1,100 down to 150 with no single breakthrough. Right? And we have a glide path to 100, below 100. Well, again, you're getting into sort of points of argument there, without a technical breakthrough, right? And so if we get a technical breakthrough, great, awesome. We don't need it.
I was just seeing a comment here from Wilf. I don't think this V2G question has been asked. How does the added battery degradation of pending V2G impact the second life scenario?
Yeah, so Wilf and I have had some good conversations about this. I'm not as, again, I guess I'm just a Luddite. I'm really not a, I struggle to see the broader case for V2G, two-way power flow. I'm a huge advocate of managed one-way flow, ton of benefit. Two-way flow adds a bunch of complexity. Having said that, the data that we're seeing, you talked about distance traveled, is at least so far strongly articulated, like it's definitely saying that if done smartly, we should be able to add additional cycles on the pack without having any material impact on degradation, right? Because we saw the data suggesting that a vehicle that goes less than 8,000 kilometers a year and a vehicle that goes more than 20,000 kilometers a year have pretty similar degradation rates. Like there is a difference, but it's not that big. And that's a huge difference in usage of that battery if you don't do a lot of fast charging. And so if you are doing, if you're staying at a certain things that, makes the battery unhappy, but you're adding cycles, I would say at least the data we're suggesting so far, that if you're doing it in a very specific way, there really isn't a strong argument, at least the data is not suggesting there's a strong argument not to do it. And I'm not a massive fan of V2G because I think the complexity and incremental cost isn't there. But on this, I can say that the data is, not supporting my argument. The data is saying we should be able to do it pretty successfully without having unreasonable taxing on the battery.
Hey, Laura, sorry to interrupt, but could we maybe just do one more question? The clock is running out here.
Sure. I'm going to go to one that's a little bit different from Kenneth. Is there a degradation difference between level 1 versus level 2, or only with the DC fast charging?
Okay, so so there's a belief by some folks that level 1 is worse on your pack. From my years beating up batteries, I am unaware of any degradation mechanism that suggests that level 1 charging would be bad on your battery. I know that's a touchy point. I know people feel very strongly on the opposite end of that. Now, from a battery management system, from a BMS perspective, there are reasons why on level 1 you can get more out of balance, which shows up to an EV owner like you have less usable range, which shows up like degradation. But the cells aren't actually degraded. It's not solid electrolyte interface. Like it's not the crusting of lithium on the cells of the anode. Like it's not true degradation like most of what happens in a battery pack. It's more around balancing on the BMS. And so that was a long way of saying when we looked at it, we saw no appreciable difference between level 1 and level 2, with a couple very specific exceptions where it looked like the battery management system of the early generation EVs weren't handling level 1 charging as well on balancing the cells and modules. So broadly, other than a very specific niche case, we saw no material difference between level 1 and level 2.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you too, Laura, for taking us through the questions. I want to thank you, Matt. That's, for my part, very interesting. I learned lots of new things through your talk and your explanation of things that I'll be able to use as I go forward. And I hope everybody else enjoyed that as well. We appreciate you sharing your time and your experience with us during the webinar. I'd also like to thank EVS members, of course, Laura, Kenneth Bakour, Anise Sharifi, who does our media, Jason Arnault, and of course, our technical wizard, Chris Guernsey, for help with today's webinar. It was really great. I hope that everybody will come back for our next Canada Talks webinar, which will be on September 1st. We're going to be hearing from Drs. Joyce Lee and Jeremy Thiel, and their fascinating talk will address the impact of EVs on climate change and your health in Canada. Should be an excellent, excellent one. As Canada moves to electrification, we all play an important role in sharing our knowledge and EV enthusiasm within our communities. We hope you found today's webinar informative and that it will help continue the EV conversation and grow awareness. Until next time, stay healthy, and thank you very much for sharing your time with us today. That concludes our webinar.